Good morning. So I got a great email from a not yet client who asked, hey man, what's the deal with QNRT? What's it all about? I can't find anything about it. Well, I want to describe a little bit about it. However, out of respect to the request of Dr. John Turner, who for very, very good reasons doesn't really want people filming themselves doing the work, because in a way it changes it. I don't know if you've noticed this, but you can like watch YouTube or TikTok and you'll see these chiropractic videos, and while I don't kind of get it, I totally get it. And I think that the power of a chiropractic adjustment is amazing. It becomes performative and theater, and honestly out of context for what that person is there for. And it also cheapens it. Social media, video, it's a very superficial realm. And, when we're talking about name techniques that take people years to master, QNRT, to be good at it, literally takes years to master. First year I did it, out of respect to John's request that nobody does that, because he's one of my main teachers, absolutely. But also in general, I think it's just cheap sometimes to do that. So anyway, QNRT is a system that is incredibly unique in its ability to help the practitioner and the client together find trauma, because trauma leaves a mark, trauma leaves residue, trauma leaves a wake of wreckage. And how does it do that? Well, clearly emotionally, psychologically, and dare we say energetically, but that's not what I'm going to talk about here. I want to talk about neurologically. So here's what I mean. It changes your brain. We know this scientifically. It changes how the different parts of your brain communicate. We know this scientifically. It changes the way something called the vagus nerve self-regulates, which therefore, through the vagus nerve and the hypothalamus, changes the way your organs and the systems that your organs create function. For example, digestion, immune system, cardiovascular, that whole family of stuff, all of it is changed by trauma. Now, most of it's changed by trauma because that's our biological evolutionary heritage. And it's a good short-term strategy, but it's lousy long-term. It's lousy for your mental health, your emotional health, and your physical health. And of course, the out pockets of those are, it's going to be bad for your relationships, because it'll be bad for your finances, and it's going to be really hard to feel whole. So what QNRT does, using muscle testing as functional neurology, it's going to help pinpoint that sequence for you for an individual trauma. So let me share a personal example, because I can easily share my story, and I don't love sharing other people's stories about this, because most stuff we hear about doing QNRT is pretty deep stuff. So I've 2016, I've shared this other videos you can look. I was really sick for 2 years. Part of that was finding out that I have some pretty substantial autoimmune genetic triggers that got triggered after a period of really prolonged stress, on top of a really high ACE score. So an ACE score is the Adverse Childhood Event Score. And what it does, it's a 10-point test that you can take online for free. And it looks at how many traumas you had as a kid. 10, so it's 0 to 10. 0 is like none, 10 is a lot. I had 8. Over 4, you're sort of, it's pretty scientific and reliable and reproducible that you're going to have some chronic health issues. Autoimmune disorders being one of them. So I got sick. The blessing of getting sick and the blessing of having your life fall apart, if you use it well, is it will help you unearth that which you need to learn to be the best version of you possible. So that's what I did. So I went and did an immersion at Dr. John Turner's clinic, totally changed my life, kept receiving the work, continued to help my brain work better. How do I know that? Because of EEG findings, plus my own self-reported internal feeling of like, dang, I feel good again. However, there was one symptom that continued to really perplex me, and it was frustrating, and it was annoying, and it was embarrassing, and it was that I would get this horrible rash all over my skin. And I find, just as a sidebar, really deep skin stuff a lot of times is it's deep inflammation. Generally some autoimmune stuff, not always, but generally on some degree, definitely some food sensitivities, gut stuff, all that functional medicine stuff for sure. But there's generational trauma there, of which I got a ton. So I go to John Turner's clinic. He says, what do you want to work on? I'm like, man, I got this thing on my legs, and it had gotten better through all the functional medicine stuff that we might do and traditional stuff. So we were working on it together, and I don't want to share too much, but he uses cold laser. I use cold laser, and he's able to see, where does that skin issue connect? Where does a shoulder issue connect? Where does a back problem connect vis-a-vis the brain and vis-a-vis trauma? So we're going along, and I knew that my mother carried terrible pain throughout most of her life, still does, I think. She's an awesome lady, and she carries a lot of pain. You know, my sister died in a car accident when my mother was driving, when my sister was 4. And that was before I was even born. Like, I was conceived shortly thereafter. So John's working on it, and he's like, hey, this is a generational pattern about your mom feeling convicted and not being able to communicate. I mean, like, how he pulls this all together is so extraordinary to me. And he said, but it also connects to your grandmother. Now, I always thought my grandmother was amazing, but her brothers were trouble. As I understand the family history, they were all alcoholics, and a number of them were involved in the Ku Klux Klan. So talk about wretched defilement. I mean, talk about just like shame. But I think my grandmother, who didn't buy into all that stuff, she felt convicted. She could never communicate. I mean, the woman could talk for hours about nothing, and I love her, but going deep wasn't there. And then my mother felt horribly convicted after my sister's death because she felt responsible. She was driving. It was a horrible trauma, and she never talked about it. Moreover, she never communicated, period. So I kind of grew up in this like emotionally, like air conditioned at 70 degrees kind of family where nobody talked about anything, but you could feel it in the air all the time. So anyway, this was a longer video than I anticipated. So anyway, what John did is then he connected this skin stuff as connected to a chronic virus, a herpes virus, which can produce lots of skin stuff, and Herpes Zoster, in fact, which is what it was. And that connected to a lobe of my brain, in what's called the parietal lobe, and the sensory portion of my parietal lobe, and then to a few cranial nerves, and then did a reset kind of through my whole body. Now, the reset I'm not going to get into because it's beyond the scope of the conversation, but here, let me tell you what happened. So first of all, like, it was such an incredible relief for me to be able to go there into that, but not have to talk about it for 10 therapy sessions. And I mean, no disrespect to therapy, but what really needed to happen is I needed to become aware of it. And in that moment of awareness where it left its sort of mark in my brain, have it reset, have that pattern reset, because I didn't even know I was carrying it. But man, I'll tell you, like, if someone's having a bad day, I'm the kind of guy who will feel guilty like I did something wrong. I don't know if you can relate. And you know, that was a pattern that didn't come from me. I'm also kind of a guy who can just plow on and not actually communicate about what's really happening. That's not a pattern that started with me, but to the degree those two things live inside of me, it actually had this physiological impact based on my inability, my immune system's inability to totally deal with a herpes zoster virus, which of course is by definition an autoimmune trigger, because then my immune system starts going wonky, but isn't properly targeted at the right thing, and instead is attacking my skin. Well, crazy, the next day, the rash was gone. Now, I did 3 other days in his clinic and continued to just like have breakthrough after breakthrough, but that's an example of how QNRT worked for me. I will share some other examples as we go, but that's a great personal vignette. Morning. And that's what I want to share with you guys. So I meant this to be like 3 minutes. It's been 10, but I hope you enjoy that. I hope you have an absolutely blessed day. And just remember, start where you are. You're doing great. Your desire to heal, a quick prayer to God, whatever that means to you, and a firm intention that you're going to get a little bit better each day. That's all you need, friends. Have a beautiful day.